Good afternoon. I'm Julie Decker, President and CEO of the FSU Alumni Association, and welcome to our 16th episode of our Webinar Wednesday series. We are bringing you something very special and important today. As early voting begins around the country, it's imperative to know your voting rights and procedures. We're bringing you nonpartisan voting resources and information to ensure you are prepared to cast your vote in the upcoming election. I am so glad you are joining us today, and I would like to introduce you to our host for today's webinar on voter awareness, FSU National Black Alumni President and Alumni Association National Board Member, Charee Williams. Charee is a dedicated professional in human capital management with extensive experience in fundraising for global, national, and local initiatives. Ms. Williams is currently employed with Randstad US, where she ensures client deliverables for strategic accounts throughout the country. In her previous role, her work expanded into Europe and South America, employing government advisors, highly skilled professionals, and student interns. Committed to making communities better, Ms. Williams has raised funds for deserving programs in health, education, women empowerment, and low-income families for over a decade. Her programs for engaging young professionals were recognized by United Way International as best practices in 2009. Ms. Williams has successfully worked with some of the leading national nonprofit organizations, Fortune 500 corporations, and the White House to provide services in over 15 countries. Ms. Williams is a graduate from Florida State University's College of Business with a degree in management. I am so pleased to have her leadership and her friendship as part of our FSU alumni family. Welcome, Charee, and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Julie. I am honored to be today's host for this amazing topic that's so important for all of us to get involved. I would first like to thank our corporate sponsors who allow us to make programming like this possible, and also thank the men and women that are members of the Alumni Association. It's because of you that we do programs like this so that we can keep you engaged, informed, but also speak to the various interests of our membership. If you or anyone you know would like to be a corporate sponsor, please reach out to the staff at the Alumni Association to get more details. As Julie shared, I am the president of FSU Black Alumni Network. Our network was created in the early 80s to support the men and women, the faculty and staff, and the students of FSU, and to also engage our alumni around the world. We are one of 9 networks and societies that are chartered affiliate organizations under the Alumni Association that are all volunteer-led. Please reach out to the Alumni Association to get involved with your networks that represent your passions and interests. You can also go to the website as well. So today I have the great pleasure of introducing our panelists. Jasmyne Henderson is a government law attorney and director of government affairs at Pittman Law Group. As an attorney, Jasmyne works within the intersection of government law and government affairs, utilizing her legal education and experience in public administration and community sciences to provide counsel and advocacy to local governments, corporations, nonprofit organizations, and individuals throughout the state of Florida. Jasmyne has been recognized as a rising star of Florida politics by Influence magazine and was inducted to the National Bar Association's 2016 40 Under 40 Nation's Best Advocates. Currently, Jasmyne is a member of the Florida Bar Association's William Reed Smith Leadership Academy, also Leadership Tallahassee, and she is the immediate past president of the Tallahassee Baristas Association. Jasmyne also serves on the FSU College of Law Alumni Association's Board of Directors and was appointed by the Florida Bar President to serve on the Governmental and Public Policy Advocacy Committee for the 3rd consecutive year. Jasmyne's passion for community and politics inspired her to charter Biscuits and Ballots, an early voting initiative. Biscuits and Ballots, first hosted before the 2018 primary and general elections, increased voter engagement and turnout for college students and young professionals in Florida's capital city. Going forward, Biscuits and Ballots continues to encourage voter engagement in young and minority voters. Aleeke Spence is a senior at Florida State University studying family and child sciences and political science. He is a member of Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated, where he serves as undergraduate board of director for the Southern Province. Nastassia Janvier Originally born in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, graduated as a first-generation student from Florida State University, and is now a master's in public administration candidate who dedicates her time to public service and activism. An inspiring lawyer, she advocates for marginalized communities by both institutional and extra-institutional means. Throughout various experiences, she continues to mobilize young people and encourage them to be civically engaged. In Florida, she has worked for lobbying firms like the Pittman Law Group in Tallahassee, where she employs her research training to develop policies for a variety of groups. As a former intern with the university's Title IX department, she raised awareness of sexual violence and rape culture on college campuses. Previously, Tazi has served as chapter president of the NAACP, as a board member of the Office of Government Affairs, and currently serves as student body vice president at Florida State University. She has worked with the Tallahassee City Council and with State Senator Annette Taddeo on a number of local and state issues. Nastassia continuously seeks opportunities to encourage millennials to participate in civic affairs. She currently is a fellow with Young People for and the NAACP's Next Gen program. The latter sponsors the development and implementation of strategic plans to address pressing community issues. Welcome, panelists. We appreciate you, taking the time out of your schedule to participate in this webinar. Jasmine, I turn it over to you.
Hi, and thank you for that introduction. I appreciate it. I also have to thank Julie Decker for having this forum today. Like she said, she started thinking about this in June, and when she reached out to me for resources and advice, I was honored and just excited that someone thought it was important to discuss issues like this. And I also want to thank Aleeke and Nastassia for being on the call today. I have to admit that they're both my former interns, and so I am excited to see them continuing to do the work. I hope some of the things that they talk about, they learned from me today. But my goal for today's forum is to just give you some information, both from a historical context about voting and our voting rights, and also motivate you to vote. I know that a lot of people have some fear and anxiety around the current election because, one, we're in the midst of a pandemic and people are unsure about going to the ballot box to cast their vote. And there are also a lot of discussion about potential voter suppression and voter fraud and getting our ballots in on time. And so I hope that we tackle all of these issues today. For my part, like I said, I'm going to just give some historical context and maybe give some tips on how you can address some of the issues that you're feeling about voting. The first being the pandemic. And I completely understand people that are fearful, about going to cast your ballot because it is a health and safety issue and your health and safety is paramount. And so for those people, I would advise and offer that you request an absentee ballot and drop your ballot off at any of the ballot drop offs that you have, which should be listed on your Supervisor of Elections office site. Charee talked a little bit about biscuits and ballots, but this year we're also doing early voting events in Tallahassee and Orlando. And what we're suggesting to people is that they come, bring their absentee ballot and drop it off at the poll so you can ensure that it is turned in. Now, voter fraud and voter suppression are a little bit tougher issues to tackle, simply because voter fraud and voter suppression sometimes are rooted, and I say sometimes because voter fraud is a serious issue, but baseless allegations of voter fraud is rooted in the same issue as voter suppression, and it's rooted in the motivation to deter you from voting, to make you fearful of the political process so that you do not exercise your right to vote. And voter suppression specifically in our nation's history is one of the dark spots in our nation's history. And we saw the most egregious examples following the Reconstruction era when Blacks and former slaves were given the right to vote. And those efforts to suppress the vote were definitely direct. You saw it in the form of violence that was directed towards people that were going to vote. You saw it in violence towards protesters who were protesting in order to have the right to vote, from people who were running for office, and sometimes white elected officials that expressed some type of sympathy and support for Blacks having the right to vote. It was also with poll taxes, which was a fee that you had to pay before you were able to vote, and literacy tests. And so we saw all of those things happen post-Reconstruction until the Civil Rights era. And we talk about them because while the efforts to suppress the vote are not as pervasive, they're still present, and they are more at the forefront of our voting process simply because of two things. One, the Civil Rights Act, which was enacted in 1965, which was a response to some of the efforts to suppress the vote, which allowed for the federal government to go into these districts that had formerly discriminated against Blacks and formerly had laws that were based on race or color. It allowed the Justice Department to go into those jurisdictions and have a presence. It also gave them the right to review laws before they were passed in those jurisdictions to make sure that they were constitutional. And so the Civil Rights Act gave teeth, and it gave strength, and it gave a backdrop for people to be able to say, these are my rights, and you cannot take them away from me. And if you are, I will go to the Justice Department, I'll go to court, I will sue you for my right to vote. Fast forward to 2013, with Shelby versus Holder, which took away a lot of the teeth of the Civil Rights Act of 1965, because those jurisdictions that had formerly discriminated against people were called special coverage jurisdictions. And what Shelby versus Holder found, was that these special coverage jurisdictions were out of date, and the formula for them was out of date, and we had gone past the era in which we needed to have them. And what you saw in a lot of states was an immediate change, an immediate response to no longer having to answer for the laws that they passed, and no longer having to get that pre-clearance from the federal government. And so in Texas, within 24 hours of the ruling, you saw that they were announcing and passing a stricter voter ID law, which impacted underrepresented communities as well as students, which is a lot of who we're speaking to today. Two other states, Mississippi and Alabama, passed similar laws. North Carolina ended early voting, they ended same-day registration. And in 2018, we saw this in Georgia. It was estimated that approximately 214 precincts in Georgia alone had been closed since the passage of since the decision of Shelby versus Holder. And we saw in Kentucky recently in their primary, where they formerly had 3,000 precincts, they only had 200, and a lot of those precincts were taken away in minority communities. And so I say all this to say, not that, there certainly is an issue, and it's not to get you angry or motivate you to go out and retaliate for these laws, but it's simply to say that these things are going to occur. You're going to see efforts to suppress the vote. And because of that, you're going to see long lines. You're going to see ballots that may be a little bit confusing. And while this is targeted to certain communities and certain people, it impacts us all. Because as a democracy, we were built on the foundation of having checks and balances. And so when power tilts too far in one direction, throws our democracy and throws our republic out of whack. So I hope that given that history, given that understanding that you're not only motivated to vote, but that you're motivated to take people that you feel may be impacted by these laws and go with them to vote, be their protection, be their friend, and do what you can to make sure as many people are included in our democratic process as possible. So that is my part. And I know Aleeke and Nastassia have some tips for you on voting today, but I just definitely thought it was important that we, although it was very quick, have a little bit of historical context to some of the things that we're seeing today.
Thank you so much for that, Jasmine. And hi, everyone. I am Aleeke Spence, like they said, a senior at Florida State, and I am currently a coalitions intern on the Biden-Harris campaign. And one of the biggest things I really wanted to touch on today is overall my experience as a campaign intern and how, as a campaign intern, I'm working to combat essentially voter suppression. So currently I'm a coalitions intern, so I oversee a portfolio of African-American faith, LGBTQ students, and young Americans. So I think it's truly important with what we're seeing now in this light is to make sure that you all have a voting plan. And that is something that from a campaign aspect, we have been making sure that everyone has a voting plan and everyone knows how to vote and where to vote and are directed to the right aspects like iwillvote.com, and making sure that you're aware of your supervisor of elections website so that you can know where to drop your ballot and when voting hours are and stuff like that, essentially, because we're seeing that voter suppression is actually a real thing. Like, for example, 2 days ago in St. Louis, Missouri, we have people being turned away from the polls for wearing Black Lives Matter shirts. We have voters who are trying to drop their ballots off in states like Texas, where you only have one ballot drop box, especially in a county like Harris County, which has 4.7 million Americans, you only have one ballot drop box. So we're seeing these efforts to suppress the vote and make sure that people's voices are not heard and they're not able to cast their vote. But that's why I'm saying this is the overall importance of this election. I think regardless of who you plan to go and vote for that day in the vote box and who you ballot bubbling on your ballot, it's important to make sure you understand the importance of this election, that our response to COVID-19 is something that we're bubbling when we bubble in on this election. And it's important to understand that our response to education, our response to healthcare, and making sure that people with pre-existing conditions do have the right and access to healthcare. So as a campaign intern, my role is just to make sure that mostly all these minority groups like women, LGBTQ, African American, Jewish, all these minority groups are well equipped and are understanding of the role they play within this election, because this is one of the most important elections, right? And I think it's important to also talk about our 2021 redistricting. So I think this all has to do with the census and why the census is important and why we should have all taken the time and opportunity to fill out the census, because this is now going to be transitioned into who will represent us at the state, the local, and the congressional level. So at the federal level, and that those are the people who have the voice and will voice our needs. So it's important to understand our role within our democracy at the local level and at the state level, and making sure that when we do vote, we don't just vote at the presidential or at the federal level for your president and your member of Congress, but actually going down the ballot and voting for people who are going to directly impact you, like your school board member, your state rep, your state senator. I think that is truly important to understand. And with that being said, I would definitely like to turn it over to my dear friend, Nastassia.
Hello and good afternoon. Thank you so much, Aleeke, for that context, and Jasmine for the context that you also provided. As we can see with some of the information that was provided today, it is so important for us to get out to vote this election cycle, not only because of the candidates that are on the ballot, but also because of the issues that essentially we will be voting on. And as we all know, on campus at Florida State University, there are plenty of initiatives that are going on, and I want to provide some insight for you with what's going on a student government level with our RSOs, our registered student organizations, and our campus entities and departments. So first of all, we can go into the Center for Leadership and Social Change. They have launched a institutional-wise voting campaign that is committed to getting students out, faculty, staff, and everybody associated with the community out to vote this election cycle. Essentially, this campaign is partnered with a plenty of community organizers in regards to talking about issues revolving voter suppression, talking about ways in which people can commit to voting, whether that's whatever it's most convenient for them, if it's early voting, if it's voting on election day, whether they're using their absentee ballots, mail-in voting, whatever is most convenient for that person. They're committed to providing that information and education so that everybody can know and have access to that information. Furthermore, we within the Student Government Association are launching a series of events within the next couple of weeks that we urge everyone to participate in. If you're a student, if you're faculty, staff, administration, community members, this is a perfect way for you to get more information about some of the things that are going on with early voting and actual election day. One of it is our What's at Stake event that will be occurring October 29th. And that event is specifically talking about what's at stake this election cycle. Who are the candidates that are going to be on the ballot? What are the amendments that are going to be on the ballot? And some of the political issues that will be talked about with this election cycle. The next event that we have is March to the Polls, and that will be occurring October 31st. And March to the Polls is a partnership event with FAMU, TCC, and FSU, committing students to getting out early Saturday morning, and let's march together. There's no better way than committing our time and our energy than doing it all one day, one sitting, and tangibly seeing that come into fruition. So those two events are things that you can definitely look out for and join. The Zoom for the What's at Stake event can be found on our FSU SGA page via Instagram. So look on there for that specific information. Now, going more into the context on why are we even having this conversation, as Jasmyne and Aleeke touched on for voter suppression, that's no surprise to us here in our own backyard within the Tallahassee area. I think it's really important for us to be honest about our own history with voter suppression that's occurred within our own community. For us to have this honest conversation is for us to look forward to the future, this election cycle, and commit to representing not only our individual selves, but representing our neighbors who live to the left or right of us, or who just are a part of our community. Particularly with voter suppression and how that exists within our own community, we can examine within a collegiate aspect some of the resources that we have provided to us. For example, back in 2018, there was a joint precinct for early voting for FAMU and FSU students, and that was specifically at the Civic Center. But we saw a lot of students, activists talk about the conveniency, how that impacted FAMU students, and what that looked like for on campus. So in order for us to have this conversation about voter suppression, we have to be honest about our history, and we have to be honest about where we want to move forward to. So particularly with that, luckily this election cycle, we do have more precincts that are available to us via the Civic Center, via on-campus site out on our relative FAMU campus, and other places in the community. And then specifically, if you want to get more hands-on on this election campaign cycle and how to get involved with SGA, get involved with registered student organizations, or even community activists that are planning around voting and getting out to vote, I would love for you guys to follow the FSU SGA page, or also follow community organizations that are working on these very important topics, like the NAACP. They are having March to the Polls, also that it's occurring November 1st. So there are multiple ways and different avenues for people to engage themselves. And if that is not something that you physically want to participate in, again, this election cycle, there's various ways to do that via mail-in ballot and absentee ballot. And I want to reiterate, our voice matters. This is the way that we engage in our democracy, and the way in which we're going to do that is by showing out and voting at the polls this election cycle. So I want to extend another great thank you for everybody that put this event on, and extend the microphone back to the host.
Thank you so much, you guys, for your amazing topics and the remarks that you added to this topic. So we have a couple questions that have come through. First question, which website would you recommend someone to go to get more information about the candidates that are on the ballot, but also the amendments? And I also understand that, there could be different people that are joining this webinar today that are in different markets. So if there's a general website that they should go to, but also if you could suggest maybe the typical local websites that have been created by, local governments, that would be great.
Well, there are several places that you can go to get information about your local candidates. One thing that I suggest everybody do is go and look on their local supervisor of elections website, because they'll usually, if they're a local candidate in the division of elections, if they're a statewide candidate, will have their reports about who is donating to them, because that is sometimes important to understand about who is pushing the candidate forward that you're interested in. I know that a lot of local newspapers also have candidate forums that they'll do. And since we are in this COVID era, a lot of them have been via Zoom, so they've been recorded. So you're able to go and see the candidates answer questions that are usually pertinent to your local community. If you're a party, if you're registered with a party, they will usually have information about the candidates that they're supporting. So you should be able to go to your executive committee website for your county, and they'll have information about the candidates. And then if you go to the candidates website, a lot of them have a lot of information that's kind of stale and very campaign focused. So not a lot of commitments, but that's also a way to learn about your candidate and what they represent. As far as the amendment, I know that the League of Women Voters has put out information about the amendments, as well as the NAACP, which is, I believe both are nonpartisan, but they give you information and breakdown on the amendments, because I was having this conversation on Zoom yesterday with some elected officials and community leaders, and they just talked about how confusing the amendments are as written. The language is not straightforward. And so they give you a little bit of background information on the amendments to give you context for you to make an informed decision on what you're actually voting about.
Thank you so much for that. I know that early voting has just started really in our state, but have you guys already seen or heard of voter suppression that has already taken place or starting to take place in our state?
I will go first. I know that early voting has started, and one of the things that I'm proud of in our state is that the NBA has dedicated their facilities to early voting locations. And even at a facility such as the Amway Arena, that is large, there are long lines to vote. And because of COVID, you had to bring your own pin. And so while those are not, that's the opposite of voter suppression, because their county's supervisor of elections decided that it was important enough to have a facility that large so people would be comfortable. There's still long lines. And in Florida, we've actually extended our early voting days in some counties, but some counties have not. In ways that we've seen it in the past was Nastassia hit on it a little bit when they talked about the effort to remove voting sites from college and university campuses. And I know Nastassia and Aleeke can talk about this, but in order for students, because they are so mobile, because they are walkable, they like to walk to places, it's important to have voting sites that are on campuses, especially on campuses as large as Florida State, FAMU, and University of Florida. And by removing those voting locations from university campuses and college campuses, you really deter, and you can see it by the numbers, you greatly decrease the number of students that are engaged in elections. And so those are some of the efforts. In previous elections, we've also seen where the way that the ballot was printed was very, very confusing. You would have larger races and further down the ballot, and people usually don't read those. And sometimes you had amendments in other places. And so there have been different ways in which it has happened. But I'm praying, because I'm an optimistic person, that in Florida, we've really addressed those. And I express my opinion, but I would think the other thing that comes to mind is the law requiring felons to have to pay their fines and fees before they're able to vote. To me, is a little bit reminiscent of a poll tax. But outside of those, there's none that immediately come to mind. So I don't know if Nastassia and Aleeke want to add anything.
Yeah, definitely. I would definitely like to echo the sentiments shared about early voting sites on college campuses and how that affects students, what that looks like with voter suppression. I think, again, as mentioned before, there's some historical context that we have to pull in to have this conversation. Although that there are different precincts available this go around, there's still things that we have to mitigate, especially dealing with long lines. How accessible are those polling sites to students? Although it's placed on a certain location, that might not technically be on central campus for majority of students. So that looks a lot different. You still have to organize carpooling. And I think that the way in which we combat a lot of those things has to deal with how do we provide resources, for example, transportation to polling sites, especially for students who do not live on campus, for students who are going to be, they're going to be discouraged if they have to walk 10 plus minutes to go vote. That's a real thing. And I think as a community member, we have to talk about those things, whether it's going to be provided for us or us as a community member need to provide it for each other with carpooling or, again, transportation services, busing, and how that works for FSU, TCC, FAMU, and then in tandem to that, pull in our community members, looking at the South Side, looking at how resources are distributed there to help those community members get to the polls, right? And I think all of those things are definitely going to have implementations. We won't see the effects of it until after the election, unfortunately, but we can do what we can do now. As Jasmine said, we have to be optimistic about how we can mitigate some of those things. And the way that we do that is by being proactive, having conversations like these, ensuring that we are watching out for our neighbors and seeing if there's any resources that we can extend to mitigate some of those consequences.
Thank you. So voting has started. What are my options to vote right now in Florida?
I think that's a great question in regards to Florida. For the state of Florida, we actually have 3 options. So you have the option to safely vote in person and vote early. You have the option to mail your ballot, and you also have the option to, we said vote in person safely, mail in our ballot, and request an absentee ballot and drop your ballot off. So I think it's important to just talk about a few points for the state of Florida. For example, so in the state of Florida, you're able to vote absentee without an excuse. Compared to other states, you might need to be over 65 or have a pre-existing condition, but in the state of Florida, you're able to vote via absentee ballot without an excuse. It's also important to understand that when you are mailing that ballot back, that the postage is not paid. So you need to put the stamps on that ballot when returning that ballot, because that ballot will not reach to where it needs to get to in order to be counted. It's also important to understand when to drop your ballot off and when you're able to mail back your ballot. If your ballot is postmarked November 3rd, it will not be counted. Your ballot needs to be received at the polling locations by November 3rd at 7 p.m. in order to be counted. And I think that's an important aspect that everyone needs to understand. If it's postmarked, like in some states, I think that's a big confusion. Some states, if it's postmarked November 3rd, they will start to count it after when it's received. But in the state of Florida, it needs to be received by 7 p.m. And I think also there's a way to rectify issues with signature mismatches in the state of Florida. So if there's a mismatch on the signature, when you sign the back of the ballot after sending it off, those are able to be rectified.
Thank you. Can you share what we are and are not allowed to wear when we go into a polling station?
Well, this is, I saw a news article yesterday where people were upset. It wasn't a news article. I can't even say it was a news article because it was on Twitter, but people were upset because a police officer in South Florida wore a Trump Pence face mask into the ballot box. And so I thought that was interesting because people usually are not supposed to wear anything with a campaign slogan on it. And so I know, Aleeke, you're dealing with that directly. So I don't know if you want to give any additional information.
Yeah, definitely. I think right now, especially with how voter suppression is and the climate that we're in, we're seeing, like I said, in the state of Missouri, when people, poll workers have sent voters back because they've been wearing Black Lives Matter shirts. So I think it's important to make sure that your voice is heard and that your vote is heard. But I don't think that the best thing in this current climate is to wear a shirt that has a campaign slogan, because in certain states, we see that there is attack and there is attack at the polls from voters, and we don't want those problems at the poll. And I think it's just best to be dressed in something that is not going to essentially tell your political party when you go and cast your vote.
Okay, but just to iterate, it is allowed, but you are suggesting that we go nonpartisan, non-social justice, if we can I hate even saying that, but just try to put your best foot forward. Don't give anyone a reason to turn you around.
Yeah, I think trying to just put your best foot forward, because I don't think the people who decided to cast their vote 2 days ago in Missouri wearing a Black Lives Matter shirt knew that they would have been turned back. So, and not being able to cast their vote. Well, luckily, justice was solved because the poll worker was actually fired yesterday morning. So I think simple things like that, just making sure that you are being who you are, but just going in a manner that is less partisan than you would always do.
And usually I know when I go at the Leon County Supervisor Elections Office, and we have an especially active as far as getting information out in a timely manner, supervisor. So I can't say this for every county, but they will stop you and they will say, okay, well, you need to cover that up. You need to put a hoodie on or something because you're not allowed to wear that at your polling precinct.
So if I'm at work and I want to go vote during the work hour, what's the best way to speak to my employer about me going to vote? We know that the lines may be long as well. So if I'm trying to go on my lunch break and it takes me longer than an hour, can you share what we should be saying or the conversations that we may need to hold with our employers or what we should expect from them in supporting our right to vote?
Yeah, that's a tough one because every employer is different. My suggestion first would be to find early voting hours that are outside the hours in which you work. Because I know, for instance, in Leon County at the courthouse, you're able to vote from 8 p.m. on Saturday until around 7 p.m. And so while people do work on weekends, there should be hours in which you're able to go vote that are outside your work hours. And those usually have shorter lines when you go to early vote, which is why it's so important, especially on the weekends. I would suggest that. And having a conversation with your employer, I would just, one, be forthright about the fact that there may be a long wait in order for you to vote. I would have that discussion beforehand, and get your employer's feel. And if your employer is like, absolutely not, I need you here, you have 1 hour lunch break, you need to cast your ballot within that 1 hour and be back, then you have to figure it out on your own, how you're able to go vote in a time that you're not working. Because Florida is a right to work state. So, gotta make sure you keep your job together.
If I am at a precinct and I see something happening that I feel as if it's not right, or I'm just not sure, what hotline should I call or who should I call to maybe share what I have witnessed? What should we do or what can we do in those situations?
I think that's an amazing question. From an aspect, when you see something that you actually think that might be a little bit problematic at your polling station, the first thing you should do is contact your supervisor of elections. So directly for whatever county you're living in and whatever county you're casting your vote for, you should definitely contact the supervisor of elections or actually go into the office safely and make sure that you're voicing what actually took place so that the issues can be rectified.
Thank you so much. Jasmyne, did you have something to add?
Oh, yes, I was just going to add, I know, for instance, a lot of national campaigns and national parties are assigning lawyers and legal teams to watch the polls. And so they will usually publish that information on their website for you to contact an attorney if you feel like something nefarious has happened at your precinct or you were prohibited from voting, or say like Aleeke gave the example of you wearing a t-shirt and being turned away from the polls. They have those resources on their website for you to call.
And I would add,
or irregularities, that's what it's called.
in addition to that, I would add to try to be as detailed as possible in regards to when reporting. If there's names that can be provided, if there's specific information, polling site, location, whatever that looks like, I think that would definitely help the context of rectifying that happening again, because we are in the early stages of early voting, and we want to make sure that those are mitigated as much as possible.
Well, I definitely want to thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Thank you all for just taking the time out to share your expertise with our alumni and friends. I hope those of you that have tuned in have really enjoyed this afternoon and this topic and getting some information so that you can be informed and prepared. I would like to encourage everyone to join us for our next webinar on November 5th for the virtual alumni network night featuring Scott Maynard from the Career Center. Sorry. You will also have the opportunity to network with FSU alumni in your industry and hear from FSU Alumni Association President and CEO, Ms. Julie Decker. Thank you so much, everyone, and go Noles.